Welcome back. Now, last week, Hollywood actor Barry Keoghan opened up about his ADHD diagnosis for the first time. ADHD can have a significant impact on individuals' life, but can often be misunderstood.
Yes, and joining us now to discuss the condition is Professor Fiona McNicholas, consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist, and Claire Twomey, who was diagnosed with ADHD when she was 28. Good morning to you both. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Fiona, can we start with you and tell us and explain what is ADHD?
It's a neurodevelopmental condition, and typically there'd be three main difficulties that the individual would have. Problems with hyperactivity, impulsivity and inattention. And increasingly now we're aware that emotional dysregulation is quite part of the picture. It's typically first identified in childhood, although we realise now that many of those are missed and that you're beginning to see a real increase in adults coming forward, recognising that they've had these long-term difficulties in their lives. I think that the prevalence is quite high. It would affect about 6 to 7% of children, and that's worldwide. So in the countries where you have data, there's the same prevalence rate. And about 4% of adults are considered now to have ADHD.
Is it a new thing? Because I kind of think that when I see some of the symptoms of it, I mean, even just with Claire, I know people are talking about applying yourself more, try harder, looking outside the school, very talkative. Things that I know are always on my report card as well. So, I mean, are these things that, like, is it something that you should get checked out for, or is it?
So it's not new in that if you go back to the literature, the academic literature, there have been case reports of very similar cases from the 30s, 1930s. But with medicine, and the more you research, the more you realise that there's a cluster of symptoms that have a definitive type of trajectory and a poor outcome. I mean, you only treat something if there's impairment associated with it. The other thing to say, Tommy, is it's on a spectrum. So we're all different degrees of hyperactivity, and you can have benefits that come with that, but you can also have adverse events. So of course somebody might be hyperactive, and by the time they get out of school they may lead a very fulfilling adult life because they choose a career that suits them. So there's no impairment there, so you wouldn't be giving it a diagnosis as such. But so it's not new, but we're certainly more research lets us know how important it is to treat.
And Claire, you were only diagnosed when you were 28. So what were the signs then? Why did you go for the diagnosis?
My 20s were extremely chaotic and I suffered badly with my mental health. And I had done counselling and CBT and psychotherapy, and I had been medicated with antidepressants and anti-anxiety tablets. And I reached a certain point and I was like, okay, so things have settled, but there were other things like the emotional dysregulation that Fiona is speaking about there. I didn't discover that until my 20s. And I wondered, you know, what else? There was something still not right. My mum at the time had said that she had thought this about me when I was in school, but because I wasn't a boy and I wasn't bold or aggressive or extremely hyperactive in terms of running around the classroom, like my hyperactivity would have been fidgeting and cognitively. So I went in search of an assessment at the time and got told on the day, we're diagnosing you with ADHD.
And what does that mean then? So is there treatment for it?
So at the time, I was very fortunate. You know, the year that I went for assessment, there was a clinic, there was a hub in St. Patrick's Mental Health Hospital, and they had a multidisciplinary team. So I was supported on a path of exploring medication, so that I could discover what was the right brand and the right dose for myself. And it was through that clinic that I was introduced to an ADHD coach. So I worked with a coach for 2 years, where we pulled absolutely everything back to discover what my strengths were, what kind of, so that I could learn how my brain works and then put things in place in an educational environment that worked for me and my type of learning style and my brain's function. I returned to college after, like post-diagnosis, and had a completely different experience from my childhood and from the first time around that I went to college.
Why?
Well, in school, I would have been very daydreamy, talkative, bored, right? So ADHD, I like to talk about it in the terms of it's not really an attention deficit, it's an attention dysregulation, right? It's a deficit of interest. So ADHDers they're really, as Fiona was mentioning about people leading lives into their adulthood, they're really, really successful, really, really capable, but certain environments are too structured and rigid for them to function. So when I was in school, things like maths and reading out loud, they caused serious anxiety in me because questions were followed and I couldn't recall what I had just learned because I needed time to read and process what I had just read. And when I went to college, it was completely overwhelming compared to, a second level education because there was no structure, no accountability.
So what changed the second time then?
So I learned what ADHD was, how my brain worked, and I began to advocate for myself. I had strategies and coping mechanisms, the biggest thing that I talk about was that I stopped trying to be neurotypical and I allowed myself to be neurodiverse.
What's that?
What's that mean?
So neurotypical is somebody who would have a typical type of brain. And
so what did you do though that was different the second time round?
So when I went back to college, I would have let my tutors know that I would have had ADHD. It may have taken me a longer time to get my assignments and things done like that.
Okay.
I had different supports. So like fidget toys, I have a fidget ring on my finger today. When I was trying to do assignments, I would have music like binaural beats playing in the background. My environment really impacted how I could focus and concentrate. And things like sleep and food, like ADHDers find those things really challenging, but all of those things have been put in place for myself through my coaching, which meant that I was in a much healthier, and also my self-esteem, right? I had a completely different story and belief about myself, and I knew that I could do this, so I kept going. Very
good. And Fiona, we think of hyperactivity as one of the main signs, and we see that you even mentioned a bold child because they're hyperactive, running around, and sort of, oh, look at that child's very bold. What other signs are there and what parents should look out for?
Being overactive, to the point of parents would describe it like a bunny, the ever-ready bunny that never stops. But the biggest thing is when they go to school that they have difficulty concentrating, focusing, remembering to bring items to and from, and sitting down and applying themselves to the homework. They often delay doing it and they suffer in terms of academic decline. Teachers will often bring that to the parents' attention because the parents adapt at home and they try their best. They'll run the kid out in the garden, they'll take them for walks, they'll manage the lifestyle a little bit better. I think the difficulty is that as you get older, you start having, as Claire said, additional secondary effects from always being in trouble. So you get quite low in mood, you get quite anxious, and there are much higher rates of additional mental health difficulties.
Is it important to get diagnosed then? If you don't get diagnosed, could there be a drop off?
Absolutely. The long-term studies would show that you have poor outcomes if you're not treated. But I think we all knew about the mental health outcomes, but what we're increasingly seeing now is that adults with ADHD die 13 years earlier than people without ADHD. So the longer studies that are looking at, and they're for the sorts of things you mentioned.
Can I ask you why?
It's the increase in cancers, increase in cardiovascular problems, increase in dementia. It's all the lifestyle choices that go with being impulsive, not thinking through things that are higher risk.
It's very interesting. I would love to hear from people at home. Is this something that you maybe suffer from, that you'd like to get more information on as well? Get in touch at 0896 111 111. Professor Fiona McNicholas, a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist, and Claire Twomey, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us this morning. Really interesting.